delighted to have Dr. Rob Natelson with us. Robert Natelson is professor, and I want to make sure because I thought about a career in higher education myself, but I couldn't remember what letters I wanted behind my name, Professor Natelson. So I went to law school, and I just tell everybody I'm a doctor anyway. So, but you are, according to most people I've talked to, probably the best expert to bring on the show to talk about Article 5 of the United States Constitution, which is in fact the linchpin, the foundational truth, the law, I guess is a good way to put it, for the states having the right via a protest or a process of initiative or whatever you want to call it to I believe is that 34 out of the 50 states have to through a process of the legislature's approval of this create a yes vote that would go to a larger convention of states, that not necessarily in Washington, D.C., but somewhere in the country physically. I guess you could do it via electronic, teleconferencing for that matter, but there needed to be that 34 state majority to create Convention 5, and we've been talking about the Convention of States and why this is important. I was hoping you would join us today. Tell us what Article 5 is for starters, because a lot of people don't know, and then what a Convention of States would look like in your expert opinion, Dr. Natelson, and what it wouldn't look like. And, oh, by the way, welcome to the show. It's an honor to have you on the program.
It's an honor to be with you, Clint. By the way, I have to say I'm not a real doctor, okay?
Yeah, neither am I.
So Rob is fine. The amendment process for the Constitution has been used several times in American history to work major reforms. For example, it wasn't actually the Civil War that abolished slavery, because you probably know several slave states fought on the north side, right. And the Emancipation Proclamation didn't apply to them. It had to be an amendment. Similarly, whenever a presidential election came up, a presidential election season, we used to have a big debate over whether the president should get a third term or even a fourth term. Well, we solved that debate once and for all by passing a constitutional amendment, the 22nd, which limited the president to 2 terms. And then when the founders became very concerned the federal government might abuse its power, they passed the Bill of Rights, which of course are the first 10 amendments. And so we've used the amendment process a lot to cure problems and dysfunction in the federal government and sometimes in the states over the course of 2 centuries. The problem we face now is that much of the dysfunction, much of the problem we have today actually is the fault of Congress. And Congress has traditionally proposed amendments to the states for ratification. Congress has proven that they're absolutely unwilling to pass any amendments that will cure those abuses or curb their own power. There's been supermajority support for the past 40 years for federal term limits, for balanced budget amendment. Congress refuses to even allow that to get out from the floor and to the states for ratification. So fortunately, the founders included in Article 5, and Article 5 is the amendment procedure of the Constitution, they provided in Article 5 an alternative way in which amendments could be proposed. And as you correctly said, that is by convention. And how that works, again, as you correctly said, is that 34 states, or 2/3 of the states, send notices to Congress and say, we want you to call a convention on this subject. And Congress is obliged to do so. All the convention is a diplomatic meeting among the states. They decide by a majority of states whether or not to propose amendments, and then they go to the states for ratification. And it takes 38 states actually to approve any of them. So it's a complicated process, but the process of the states meeting together is very well trod, very well understood. It's been going on actually since before they were states, for over 300 years now. And so it's not something that it's a familiar process, but it has not been used specifically under Article 5 yet.
Now, we have interviewed some other key figures in the Convention of States hierarchy of leadership, which is an amazing group of people. One of the ones that comes to mind immediately is former U.S. Senator Tom Coburn from Oklahoma, who has told me on a couple of occasions. I hosted the Dennis Prager Show nationally a couple of weeks ago, and he was one of my guests there, just to get the word out nationally. Dennis Prager is a big believer in the Convention of States concept as well. But there was a little bit of a disconnect in terms of what it is and what it's trying to do and how we get there. How do we bridge that gulf, not only pragmatically and practically speaking, but intellectually speaking, so that the people actually understand why we're invoking it and why we're trying to use that as a methodology to move the country forward. Tom Coburn was very, after serving in the Senate for 2 or 3 terms, I don't remember, but he was there for a while. Left in 2015, said he left because nothing could get done and he didn't see any hope that anything really significant would, given the current structure and the gridlock and just the K Street politics of the whole place. How do you view that comment? Is that kind of consistent with your views on where we stand with the quote-unquote swamp and the rhinos and the demos and whatever O's we're talking about today?
Well, I agree with this comment. I've been following politics since the Goldwater campaign in 1964. And some people will say, well, how we need to change the system is we need to change the Supreme Court and we need to elect good people to office. Well, in many elections we do elect good people to office. The problem is that the system defeats them. You know, if you're sitting around and you're playing a game with rules like Russian roulette has, it doesn't matter how good the people are, somebody's going to wind up dead. And so the system itself has become so dysfunctional that even when good people try to do good, it often winds up backfiring against them. So there's no question that we need systemic change. On the issue of the Supreme Court, you will recall that Senator Susan Collins of Maine gave a talk in which she announced why she was going to support Brett Kavanaugh.
Yes.
And if you look at her entire speech, as I did, a keynote of her argument was, he's really not going to change anything. He's not going to overrule Roe versus Wade or the same-sex marriage decision. He's absolutely committed to how things are.
And that's what they wanted to hear. So right. It's not what we wanted to hear, but yeah.
Well, unfortunately, we have a problem, and we need a Supreme Court justice who is in fact going to be willing to try to return us to constitutional government. It's not going to happen from the Supreme Court. It's not going to happen from Congress. It's got to happen from the people operating through their state legislatures, using the process that the founders themselves said that we should use in a situation like this.
Of the United States Constitution.
Go to conventionofstates.com, press the button, sign the petition. More importantly, get 10 of your friends to do the same. When you sign the petition, then that sends a letter to your state legislator. You go on the list in their district as a supporter. We deliver those lists to the state legislators. It means something to them.